Hi everyone, this mini lecture is about sentences and clauses. You can see my fancy Venn diagram there almost in the exact middle of the screen. I'll get to that in just a second. A lot of us probably learned throughout school that a sentence is a group of words that expresses a complete thought and has a period at the end. That's true in at least some parts, but there's a little bit of nuance to the idea of what a sentence is that you need to know about, I think, in order to make sentences that are not only grammatically correct, but also stylistically appropriate. So hopefully what this mini lecture will help you do is be a little bit more conscious about the sentences that you write, about the options that you have, and the exercise at the end will ask you to demonstrate what you already know about sentences and clauses and what you learned from this mini lecture. And then the upcoming assignments, among other things, the major assignments in the course, will ask you to demonstrate some of what you are learning and practicing with sentences and clauses. So this diagram of circles is intended to suggest that, actually I didn't even label the big circle. The really big circle that's on the outside is supposed to be the entire possible universe of clauses. What's a clause? You see it right there, the red word clause about halfway down. It's a group of words that expresses a complete thought. In other words, grammatically speaking, that means it has at least a subject and a verb. So a subject, as we know in English, is the word that describes the agent, whatever or whoever is doing the action in the sentence. A verb just describes the action that the subject is doing, or in some cases a relationship that the subject is trying to form with another person or a thing. So a clause has at least a subject and a verb. Now, it's possible for, now sentences are certainly clauses. So a sentence is actually a type of clause. But by saying that the idea of a clause is bigger than the idea of a sentence, which is what I hope I'm showing you clearly with this diagram, I just wanted to call your attention to a couple of other ways that clauses exist that aren't necessarily sentences. An independent clause or a main clause is a clause that can function on its own as a complete sentence but doesn't have to. I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. So you can put a period at the end of an independent clause, you can call it a sentence, and it's a sentence. It's grammatically complete. It passes the test of being a grammatically complete sentence in English if you want to do that. A dependent clause, or a helping clause, which may be a more intuitive way to call it, is a clause that has a subject and a verb, but that can't stand on its own. What it does is very often provide additional detail or context to a main clause. So it can't be there by its own, but sometimes a main clause needs the help of a dependent or a helping clause really to flesh out the meaning. And then a sentence is an independent clause or a main clause that is treated by you, the writer, and by the reader as a standalone. So a sentence is just really an independent clause or a main clause that you decide to treat as a sentence. So let's look at a couple of examples. I fell down, which I actually did do yesterday on some of the ice, and it hurt, but I'm not too sore today. I fell down is a grammatically complete sentence. It's a main clause, so you don't have to make it a sentence, but you can. You can stick a period right there, and that's fine. You're done. I fell down. Great. Now, in a lot of cases, you probably want to add some explanatory detail. So, for instance, if you're having a conversation with someone, you say, "Oh yeah, by the way, I fell down." They might say, "Well, what are you talking about? You fell down." And so that's kind of a prompt to add more information. Okay? So what you see right after that is a helping clause that we might or might not stick onto the main clause, I fell down. Because I was walking along a sidewalk that was a solid sheet of ice and was wearing shoes that had almost no tread on the soles. That's a clause. But you're probably, if you just read that by itself, you feel like you're left hanging at the end of that clause. Like it's not a complete sentence. It's not really a complete thought. It's asking for something else. Incidentally, because this helping clause, because it's a helping clause and it's not a main clause or an independent clause, this is, and because it starts with because, this gives a lot of English teachers the reason to tell you that they don't want you to start sentences with the word because. And that's because the word because, there are a lot of becauses here. The word because is a word that signals the beginning of a helping clause. So if you use the word because and you start writing this helping clause and it's as long as this one is, you might just stick a period in there without really thinking about it and then move on to the next sentence. And as you know by now, writing sentences that aren't grammatically complete is a really quick way to annoy a lot of teachers. So that's why you get the rule, don't start a sentence with because. You can, of course, start a sentence with because. You just want to make sure that you complete it. Okay? So what do you notice here? You notice that the main clause is really short, but the helping clause is really long. That's perfectly okay. It's possible for the main clause to be really long and the helping clause to be really short, but it is entirely grammatically appropriate just to have the main clause have even one sentence. You could say like stop or quit or move. That would be a main clause. Or I fell instead of I fell down. That can be a main clause as well. And helping clauses can go on for a long time. You want to be careful about that because especially if you use a helping clause at the beginning of a sentence and it's really long, it can take a reader a long time to get to the point of the sentence, which is in the main clause. So if you delay the main clause at the end of a really long helping clause, it can kind of annoy your readers. So how do you know that you're looking at a helping clause? Well, as I said, it doesn't really stand on its own as a complete thought, and the big way you know that is that a helping clause is marked by a signal word. That's what I'm telling you right here, in case you are following along visually. There are a couple different kinds of signal words that you might find at the beginning of a helping clause. A relative clause signal words, or relative clause signal words, are words that are used by clauses that act like nouns or adjectives. You probably, you learned at some point that a noun is a word that describes a person, place, or thing, or an adjective is a word that describes a noun. But it's perfectly possible for nouns and adjectives and verbs and other parts of speech to be multiple words, to be more than one word. Sometimes a clause actually works like a noun or an adjective. Sometimes a clause acts like an adverb. So when you've got a clause that's acting like a noun or an adjective, it's usually going to begin with one of those relative clause signal words: when, where, why, who, whose, whom, that, and which. You'll see a couple of asterisks right there. We'll get to those in just a few minutes. Subordinating conjunctions, there's a really, really long list of these. You can find them a lot of different places. You can even go to Wikipedia and find a list of subordinating conjunction. Did he just say that we could go to Wikipedia? Yes, he did. Anyway, a subordinating conjunction is a word on this list: after, although, as long as, because, which you already know, in order that, since, unless, until. A lot of these words that we call transition words are actually subordinating conjunctions, and it's just a really fancy way of saying that it is a word that introduces a subordinate or a dependent clause that's acting like an adverb. In other words, it's modifying the verb in the main clause of the sentence. So here's some examples of how this might work. The two sentences, or the main clause and the helping clause I just gave you, we can easily put that together. Because I was walking along an icy sidewalk, I fell down. You notice there's a comma there. We're not really going to talk about commas right now, but suffice to say, one of the important uses of commas is that it separates, often separates, not always, often separates a main clause from a helping clause. Adverb clauses, as it turns out, are really movable. They can go just about anywhere in the sentence. Sometimes that can get you into trouble. I'm not going to go into that right now, but just so you know, I could, instead of writing, because I was walking along an icy sidewalk, I fell down, I could write, I fell down because I was walking along an icy sidewalk. Now, I like the first one better than the second one because, as I said in class, a lot of people rely on the principle of end emphasis. That is to say that if I'm writing or reading, I'm going to tend to emphasize what I see last. And I kind of want to emphasize that I fell down because I want your sympathy. So, because I was walking along an icy sidewalk, I fell down. I want to leave people with that, okay? Because if I go with the second sentence, they might forget by the time I get to that sentence, oh, what are we talking about again? Oh yeah, you fell down. Here are a couple of other examples. This one right here, that's the spot on the sidewalk where I fell. It's kind of a different way of expressing the same idea that I just expressed. But instead of using an adverb clause, you'll notice here, I fell down. So fell down is the verb. And this clause, because I was walking along an icy sidewalk, modifies the verb. It asks questions about, well, how? Like, where did you fall down, or why did you fall down, right? That's an adverb. In this sentence, I'm using I'm using the subordinate clause, where I fell, as an adjective. That's the spot on the sidewalk where I fell. It's a way of modifying the word, the noun, spot. Okay? So usually these kinds of clauses, these relative clauses that work as nouns or adjectives, get introduced with this different set of signal words. Here's a little bit more of an illustration of the movability of these adverb clauses, these helping clauses, and how that can make a difference in the meaning of a sentence. This first sentence, read that. Although the new tablet, like an iPad or whatever, but I just didn't want to write iPad. Although the new tablet is still expensive, its cost has dropped. Well, it feels like, for a couple of reasons. You know, I said end emphasis. Whatever's at the end of the sentence is what's going to get remembered. But also the fact that I have put the idea that its cost has dropped in the main clause of this sentence. That tells you that that's really where I'm putting my emphasis. You know this is the main clause. This is a quick and easy test. If you cover up with your hand, just put your hand on the other side of the sentence before the comma, and you just read this part of the sentence, it reads like a complete sentence, doesn't it? So that's the main clause. If you were to put your hand over the last part of the sentence and just read the first part, although the new tablet is still expensive, that doesn't seem like a complete sentence. So that's the dependent clause or the helping clause. Now, what if I swap? Although the new tablet's cost has dropped, it is still expensive. So the meaning of the sentence is still kind of the same, but I'm just emphasizing different material by moving stuff around between the main clause and the helping clause. Here, I'm emphasizing that it is still expensive, even though the cost has dropped. Up here, I'm emphasizing that its cost has dropped. So obviously, I might choose one of these over another depending on who I'm talking to, right? So, some notes. I said that I would come back to these special words that have stars. You want to be careful with who and whom. English, by and large, does not, here's a little linguistics lesson. English, by and large, doesn't indicate the parts of speech of words by changing their spelling. A lot of other languages do that. Russian, Latin, Polish. English doesn't really do that. By and large, we rely on word order in a sentence to indicate part of speech. But there are a few exceptions, and this is one of them, who and whom. And you may have run into this distinction before and not known what in the world it is. Who is a pronoun that is used as a subject of a sentence. Whom is used as the object of a sentence. Okay? So there's a difference between these two sentences, and you can tell by the spelling. He's the guy who picked me up from the sidewalk. So I'm using this noun clause here, this helping clause, to modify the noun guy. He's the guy who picked me up from the sidewalk. In this one, it's a little different. He's the guy whom I was talking about. Now, I put whom in parentheses there to show you that you don't really need whom. You could just say, he's the guy I was talking about. But if you had whom, it's kind of an understood whom, I guess. But it has to be whom because the guy, in this case, is actually functioning as an object. Do you see that? It's receiving the action. I was talking about this guy. Where in this case, the guy was actually kind of doing the action, so he's more the subject. And in both of these cases, the who or the whom stands for the guy. It's just that guy in both of these sentences serves a different part of speech, so I have to spell them differently. So just kind of be aware of that. That's something that if you screw up who and whom, that is something that can really annoy a lot of people who are reading your writing. Okay, so just you want to be aware of that. If you've got questions, ask me. Also, this is a little bit more complicated, that and which. Sometimes people will tell you, especially really picky grammar people will tell you that is a pronoun you use to introduce essential information, and that which is a pronoun you use to introduce non-essential information. So there's a difference, technically speaking, between these two sentences. The ice melt stuff that's in the blue bag is what you should use on the sidewalk. So in this case, we have that. And what I'm trying to signal with this sentence is that this information right here, introduced by that's a clause, is really essential information. In other words, you can imagine that you're looking at a couple of different bags, one's red, one's blue, and one's green, and I'm telling you, no, if you're going to put that ice melt on the sidewalk, use the stuff in the blue bag, not the stuff in the red bag, because the stuff in the red bag will, kill my dogs or whatever. So put the stuff in the blue bag on the sidewalk. Okay, in this sentence, what I'm trying to signal is, oh, by the way, the ice melt stuff that I'm asking you to use is in the blue bag, just in case you didn't know that. Okay? So in that case, I'm either assuming you already know that, or there's just only one bag there. That's a really technical, really precise distinction between that and which, but I just want you to be aware that a lot of people read a difference between that and which, and so it's just something that you should at least keep in the back of your mind. Okay, so we've gone over a number of uses of clauses, how they function. This is by no means a complete lesson about clauses. There are a lot of different places you can go to get more information if you want it or need it. There are a lot of handbooks I can direct you to. There are sites online I can direct you to. So if you feel like you have lingering questions about this, please feel free to ask me in or out of class. And among other things, I'll be happy to give you a referral to one of those sources. So here is your exercise to demonstrate that you have watched this mini lecture and that you understand it. Here's a sentence. I dropped the computer on the sidewalk. Perfectly acceptable grammatical sentence. It is a main clause, and I intend for it to stand alone as a sentence. So it's got a period at the end. That's what I'm trying to say. But I want you to modify this sentence. Make 5 additional sentences based on this sentence by experimenting with clauses. And what I mean by that is primarily maybe adding some subordinate clauses, whether they are adverbial or adjective clauses or whether they are noun clauses. You can also feel free to change the wording of the main clause, but I want to see 5 additional sentences that show some different sentence structures based on this mini lecture. Okay? I will create a Dropbox in Canvas for that. Thank you for your attention, and I will see you soon.